Singularity is not a single soundbite. It stems from the exponential growth of information technology. So that's the core observation. Information technology grows exponentially. It doubles generally every year, depending on what you're measuring. This has been true of computers since the 1890 American census, and it's a very smooth exponential progression. The power of a computer that you can get per euro, per dollar, has multiplied trillions fold over the last century, a billion fold just since I was a student. But it's not just computers, it's everything that we care about ultimately. Health and medicine was not an information technology up until recently, but now that we have the genome, which is the software of life, we're learning how the genome produces life, we're learning what the software of life means. Health and medicine is becoming an information technology, and we have the means of rewriting that software. Our genes evolved thousands or even millions of years ago. The fat insulin receptor gene, for example, says, hold on to every calorie because the next hunting season may not work out so well. I'd like to tell my fat insulin receptor gene, you don't need to hold on to every calorie. I'm confident I'll have food tomorrow. We'd like to reprogram it. We have technologies to do that now. RNA interference can turn genes off. This was tried in animal experiments. They turned off that gene, and these animals ate a lot and remained slim, and they lived 20% longer. There's 23,000 genes we'd like to consider tinkering with. Health and medicine has become an information technology, and the power of these technologies doubles every year. And that's different than our intuition. Our intuition about the future is that it's linear, that it keeps going at the same pace, making progress, but linear progress. And so what difference does that make? Well, if I take 30 steps linearly, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that's our intuition about the future, I get to 30. If I take 30 steps exponentially, 2, 4, 8, 16, that's the reality of information technology, I get to 1 billion. It makes a huge difference. And this is not an idle speculation about the future. When I was a student, we all shared a computer, cost tens of millions of dollars, took up half a building. This computer is 1 million times cheaper. It's thousands of times more powerful. That's billions-fold increase in the number of MIPS per dollar, bits of communication per dollar. It's 100,000 times smaller, and we'll do that again. What now fits in my pocket will fit inside a blood cell in 25 years, and will be 1 billion times more powerful per dollar again. So what people predict for long periods of time turns out to be a tremendous underestimate because they're leaving out this exponential progression. The singularity results from looking at the implication of what I've just said, exponential growth of information technology out some 3 or 4 decades. By 2045, we will have multiplied the intelligence of our human-machine civilization. I do see it as one integrated civilization with human biological intelligence merging with the machine intelligence we're creating. We'll have multiplied it 1 billion-fold. That's such a singular, profound transformation that we borrow this metaphor from physics, really the metaphor of the event horizon around a singularity. In physics, there's a black hole, there's a singularity, it's a tear in the fabric of space-time. There's an event horizon around it where things are so weird and so different past the event horizon you can't easily see beyond it. So in terms of this historical singularity, we borrow that metaphor and say past the point where we've multiplied our intelligence 1 billion-fold, it's very hard for us to imagine what that would be like. I believe we're going to keep our humanity. I don't like the term transhumanist because it implies we're going to go beyond human. I believe we're going to go beyond biology. We've done that already. I mean, we are the only species on the planet that goes beyond our limitations. We didn't stay in the ground, we didn't stay in the planet, and we've not stayed with the limits of our biological bodies. Human life expectancy was 23,000 years ago. I spoke to some junior high school students recently, and I said, you all would be senior citizens if it wasn't for the progress we've made. Human life expectancy was 37 in 1800. There was no sanitation, no antibiotics. Schubert and Mozart died in their 30s, and that was typical. Now that we actually are beginning to understand biology as a set of software processes, that's fundamentally what we are. And we don't fully understand them yet, but we will within 20 years. And we are gaining the tools to change them and reprogram them, turn genes off that encourage disease, add new genes that protect us, change all of the information processes towards greater longevity, vitality, expand who we are. We'll be able to dramatically extend human longevity. And we're going to merge with our technology. When I was a student, I had to take my bicycle to the computer. Now it's on my belt. It's ultimately going to make its way inside my body and brain. If that sounds very futuristic, I point out there are lots of people that have computers inside their bodies now, like artificial pancreases, which are computerized to do what the real pancreas does in terms of measuring sugar levels and computing the right amount of insulin. Or you can put a computer in your brain today if you're a Parkinson's patient, and it replaces the function of the biological neurons destroyed by the disease. The latest generation actually allows you to download new software to the computer inside your brain from outside the patient. And there was a New York Times article recently expressing concern about people hacking into the software that people are downloading into the computer inside their brains today. And it was not a humor piece. So these technologies are at a very early stage. But the important thing to recognize is that they're going to grow exponentially. They will be 1 billion times more powerful in 25 years, 100,000 times smaller in size. We'll be able to add computation to our brains without surgery, non-invasively, sending tiny computers through the bloodstream into our brains, which will then put our brains into full immersion virtual reality environments, augmented reality, expand our thinking processes, our memory, put our brains right on the internet. And we will, I mean, it's a convenient place to put the computers. So you won't lose them if they're inside your bodies and brains. There'll be little computers augmenting your immune system, like robotic white blood cells that are programmed against specific pathogens. So these are some of the things we'll see over the next 20, 30 years. We're going to become increasingly non-biological. Ultimately, computers today can do lots of things that humans can't, but humans can still do things that machines can't, like be funny, which is actually one of the most complicated, sophisticated things we do. But ultimately, that gap will close. But this is not going to be an alien invasion of intelligent machines to compete with us and displace us. We're creating them to extend ourselves. And that's what we're going to do with them, and we're going to literally merge with them. So you talk to a routine biological human with normal parents in 2035, they will be a hybrid of biological and non-biological intelligence. But then you have to consider that the non-biological, the machine part of their intelligence, that's going to grow exponentially, not because it's self-replicating, but just because that's the nature of the technology. It's constantly getting more powerful, twice as powerful every year for the same cost. So over time, that part of our intelligence is going to grow. The biological intelligence we have, which I computed about 10 to the 26 calculations per second in the human species, that's pretty much fixed. We may learn a few new tricks and find better ways to learn, but basically that's not going to change very much. So go out, say to 2045, the bulk of our thinking is going to be non-biological. We're going to become principally non-biological, but it's a gradual evolution, although a quick one. We're not jumping in terms of, taking one instant leap from a biological form to some robotic form. We're going to be gradually adding these bits and pieces to ourselves. And people sometimes find that disquieting, and they express philosophical opposition. But when it comes to real practical applications, there are a number of exciting projects to, for example, bridge broken nerves so that a paralyzed person will be able to basically fix that breakage in their spinal cord. People adopt these things immediately, enthusiastically, and nobody protests. Some new cure or even a better treatment for cancer or heart disease. Nobody waxes philosophically, well, I don't know, do we really want to extend life? It's only when we discuss it abstractly. When we're going to get from here to there, not in some one big leap, check here, do you want to be enhanced by machine intelligence, yes or no? It comes from thousands, millions of little steps, each of which is quite conservative and makes sense and is tested. That's how we get from here to there, but those steps are coming faster and faster. It's going to happen because each change makes sense and is considered in a marketplace, and lots of them don't make sense and fail in the marketplace. But eventually the advantages and benefits are so overwhelming that they're impossible to resist. I mean, the only thing actually that would stop this, when people talk about let's relinquish genetics or nanotechnology or robotics because they're too dangerous, and there are dangers which we can talk about, it would require totalitarian world government to enforce such a ban. That was basically the theme of the novel Brave New World. They thought technology is dangerous, we can't have that in individuals' hands, so we're going to ban it. And it actually didn't work. It just drove the technology underground where it became even more dangerous. So we can talk about the dangers, but I don't think anything short of a totalitarian system would stop it, and we don't want that anyway. And there's many good reasons to continue this progression because there's still a lot of human suffering we want to overcome. This is not some alien civilization that's being created in Antarctica or on Mars and comes to invade us. I mean, if you look at how it's going, it's widely distributed. It's not even an elite of humans that have these machines. People say, oh, only the wealthy will have these machines. And I say, yeah, like cell phones. There are 5 billion cell phones. 30% of Africans have cell phones. Half the farmers in China have cell phones. Within a year or two, they'll all be smartphones, be able to access the web, provide access to all of human knowledge, which a billion people now on the planet have, and that's growing rapidly. Technology starts out unaffordable at a point where it actually doesn't work. By the time it works well, it's so inexpensive that virtually everybody has it. Because of what I call the law of accelerating returns, every year this technology is approximately twice as powerful. Even that rate is increasing. It took 3 years to double the price performance of computing in 1900, 2 years in 1950, 12 months in the year 2000. It's now down to 11 months. But even just doubling every year means we have whole new possibilities every year. Why didn't people think of the iPod 15 years ago? Well, it was thought of, but it would have cost $10,000 each, and it wasn't affordable. When price performance reached certain levels, that application exploded. You can look at fax machines, digital cameras, social networks, wikis, blogs. Each one took off at a particular point when it was cost effective to do that. National Institutes of Health in the United States is collecting 1 million genomes to provide a very powerful database to predict disease. That wasn't possible when the genome cost $1 billion each to sequence. So there's always new opportunities. It's actually a very exciting time to be an entrepreneur. If you miss the boat on one thing, just wait a year and there's 10 new applications that weren't feasible before. Pharmaceutical industry so is complaining about how hard it is to find new drugs. Well, there's a whole new methodology that's coming to bear now. The old methodology is still being practiced, but it's being replaced. The old methodology is called drug discovery, which literally means you got an objective, you just find lots of things until you find something that doesn't. Go through 10,000 compounds systematically, find something that lowers blood pressure, but with no real theory about why it would work. And invariably, these crude found tools have many side effects. It's kind of like when we created tools just by looking around the ground and, oh, here's a rock, this would make a pretty good hammer. We couldn't actually design tools and shape them for a specific purpose. Now, as we're actually understanding the software of life and how it interacts, we can actually design at a computer interventions like turning off a specific network of genes or adding new genes that can perform a certain function, and then test them out on biological simulators. That's a whole different approach, rational drug design. The phrase has been around for a while, but it's only recently that we have the tools to do that. And those technologies are going to double in power every year. They'll be 1,000 times more powerful than they are today in 10 years, 1,000,000 times more powerful in 20 years. So we're at an early stage. It's kind of like the dot-coms. People said, oh, this is going to change every business model. And you remember, all the values went up like this. And then Wall Street came back 3 years later and said, gee, it hasn't changed every business model. It hasn't changed anything. I guess we were wrong, and all the values went down. But meanwhile, it was marching along exponentially. But exponential growth isn't instant. In fact, it starts out very slowly because you're doubling very little numbers. Finally, after the dot-com crash, it took off. We have dot-coms now like Google with $20 billion of real revenue, $2 trillion overall for e-commerce. The same thing is going to happen with rational drug design in medicine, in that we can actually sit down now with very powerful tools and design an intervention based on a real knowledge of how heart disease or cancer or diabetes or any other disease really works and how to reprogram biology away from it. But you have to wait until that really gets traction and you're at a mature phase of that revolution, which I think is still 10, 15 years away. But within 20 years, it's going to be a very different era. I've been involved with artificial intelligence and have had an interest in the brain as a model for AI for 50 years. And so I think I understand the complexity as well as anyone. And secondly, it's not my view that the brain is simple, but many of these critics are overstating the complexity, saying, oh, it would take trillions of lines of code to simulate the brain because there are hundreds of trillions of connections. And so where are these lines of code? I mean, where do they exist? The design of the brain is in the genome. The genome only has 50 million bytes of information. That's about 1 million lines of code. Okay, it's not a conventional language. It's expressed in complex three-dimensional proteins that interact with each other in complex ways. But that's the amount of information in the brain after you remove the redundancy. I mean, I have this whole analysis and singularity is near. Now, the brain then actually doesn't do much after it's been designed by those 50 million bytes. It's actually only half of it goes to the brain, so it's maybe 25 million bytes. It has to interact with a complex environment. So part of the paradigm of human intelligence is learning and interacting with an environment. And AI is going to have to do the same thing. But there's nothing magical about that either. And we can design an educational program for an AI so that it will learn. There's work right now at CMU, which actually is based on a functional model of how the neocortex develops concepts. It's not a simulation of the neocortex, but it is simulating the basic paradigm about how relationships are understood, particularly in language. And then the system goes out there and on its own is learning very impressively to add to its own understanding about what a chair is and what different kinds of chairs are and what irony is or humor or all these different concepts that we deal with by actually reading about them. And occasionally it actually gets off track. It thinks that chips are really pieces of chocolate, and it's then misinterpreting a lot of the literature about electronic chips. And so a human actually comes in and says, no, that's an electronic device, it's not a food. And the system then goes back and reconsiders everything it thought about chips, very much like a human would do. I mean, we go and as a child and we make certain assumptions about what we've heard and learned, and then the teacher says, no, that's not right. And we correct then our understanding. The system is doing a very similar thing. There's a tremendous amount of redundancy in the brain. I mean, take the cerebellum where we do our skill formation, catching a fly ball. It has a certain pattern that's repeated 10 billion times with a little bit of random variation with each repetition. And then that system gets filled up with information as we learn to walk and to talk and to catch a fly ball. Most important region, the neocortex, which is where we do our hierarchical thinking, being able to associate a bunch of ideas in a certain pattern as an idea and give it a name, a symbol, and then use that symbol in another idea. We develop this whole hierarchy of ideas we call knowledge. That takes place in the neocortex. It has 1 billion little modules that recognize patterns. We can learn patterns and we recognize them. So one pattern might be the idea of a crossbar and a capital A. And we learn that concept in this, probably a number of these modules in the neocortex that recognize that crossbar. Another module will recognize irony or humor. And it obviously sits much higher in the conceptual network. The crossbar detector is very low, and the irony and humor are sitting higher up, and there's many of them because there's many different types of irony. You might think, oh, those must be much more complex. They're actually the same thing. They just have different inputs coming into them, and they're at the top of a very elaborate hierarchy. There was actually brain surgery done on a girl, and whenever they triggered it, and you can be conscious during brain surgery because there's no pain receptors in the brain. So whenever they triggered a particular spot, she would start to laugh. And people thought, okay, they must be triggering a laugh reflex. But no, they were actually triggering the point in her neocortex where she detected humor. And she just found everything hilarious when they triggered this spot. You guys are just so funny standing there was a typical comment whenever they triggered this spot. Might seem mechanistic and reductionist, but that actually is how the neocortex works. Our principal point, though, is that this module, which has a certain amount of complexity in it, and there's a certain amount of complexity in how they're wired, but it's repeated 1 billion times. And so it's not that every single wire, every single connection in the brain is there by design. There's a tremendous amount of redundancy and then self-organization as the system learns material and responds to its environment and its education. It's not a simple system, but it's a level of complexity we can handle. There are simulations like Markram's Blue Brain Project and many others at different levels that are simulating the brain. Some are actually going from the molecular level. Some are doing it more from a functional point of view, actually understanding the algorithms and implementing them, but not trying to be an exact simulation of what takes place in the brain. These are scaling up exponentially. There's not an attempt necessarily to simulate every single wire and every single molecule, because a lot of the complexity of the brain has to do with its biological function and the sort of ability of neurons just to live as biological cells, which don't really contribute to its information processing. But I would say the main thing that these critics leave out is the power of exponential growth. They're thinking linearly, because that's our intuition, and they've not studied the reality of the exponential growth of information technology. And if I thought that progress in brain science, which is in information technology, was linear and was just going to progress at the same rate and was not going to be affected by the increase in power of all the tools we have to look inside the brain, which are actually doubling in resolution every year, and that the computers we have to simulate these things aren't progressing exponentially, but in fact they're doubling every year. If I thought things were linear, I would agree with these critics that we are centuries away. It's really they're leaving out the power of exponential growth. And I've actually done these analyses, and I've been very consistent that we'll be able to simulate a whole brain, at least functionally, by 2029. We're in the early stages now, particularly of brain science, where we have enough resolution to see inside the brain. I mean, it's only a few years ago that the best brain scanners was just fMRI, which makes interesting pictures and tells you a little bit about where things are happening. You look at a loved one and this area lights up, and you solve a logic puzzle and another area lights up, and kind of tells you where things are happening, but not with enough precision to tell the algorithm. We could now, with non-invasive brain scanners, we can see individual internal connections. We can see new synapses form, new dendrites, see them form and fire in real time. We're actually gaining wiring patterns slices of the neocortex, and it's only the last few years that we have enough precision to see inside the brain to do that. We have machines come up with creative ideas all the time. We use genetic algorithms, for example, to simulate evolution, to actually create a simulated biological and evolutionary environment and have different solutions to a problem compete with each other. And each one actually has a genome describing a possible solution. And they go through a simulated evolution and actually evolve a solution to a problem that is a brilliant solution to a design, to an algorithm. This is called genetic programming or genetic algorithms. And very often they're very surprising, intricate solutions that look kind of organic in their complexity. So that's one way to get original ideas. If you look at this Carnegie Mellon project, it's been let loose on the huge amount of literature we have on the web, which is so vast and such a tremendous amount of material that we really can't contemplate what would a machine think of as it reads all that material. No human can actually read that much. That's one of the advantages of a machine ultimately. So right now machines don't understand as much as humans when they read something, but they can read a lot more than we can. Ultimately, as they really understand what all those sentences and paragraphs mean, they can go out and read billions of pages of material. This Carnegie Mellon system is coming up with interesting and unique insights. I wrote The Singularities Near in 2005. There's been tremendous progress since I wrote that. And I'm still comfortable with my 2029 date for really understanding the principles of operation of the human brain. That's the goal of the reverse engineering project. The goal is really not to create a Markram-style simulation, which is not a criticism of the project, because I think in doing those simulations, we will learn about how the brain works. But that's the goal, to understand the principles of operation. Then we can take engineering and technology and apply it to creating intelligent systems that aren't based on the vagaries of having biological neurons and supporting them with blood and all the complexities we don't really have to deal with when we create artificial intelligence. That's what engineering does well. Engineering took, for example, the Bernoulli's principle, which is a subtle scientific principle that says there's slightly less air pressure over a moving curved surface than a flat surface. They're still arguing about the thermodynamics of that, why that's the case. Engineering came in and amplified and leveraged that scientific principle and created the whole world of aviation. So as we understand the basic principles by which the human brain is able to perform intelligent functions, we can engineer it to be more powerful. We have 1 billion little pattern recognizers in our neocortex. Why stop at 1 billion? How about 10 billion? How about 1 trillion? We can handle about 8 levels of hierarchy. Why 8? How about 20? How about 100? So we can amplify it. One of the real innovations in Homo sapiens is we have a neocortex that's the size of a table napkin. It's folded up so that it fits on top of the brain. But we don't have to stop at that size. We can have a much bigger one. It won't run on a chemical substrate that sends messages at a few hundred feet per second. It can send messages 1 million times faster than that, and so on. It's important to understand that the nature of exponential progress. Take the Genome Project. It's a 15-year project. Halfway through the project, skeptics were going strong, saying, I told you this wasn't going to work. You're halfway through the project and you finished 1% of the project, and even that 1% is full of errors. I told you this is going to take centuries. But that was actually right on schedule, because you start out doubling tiny little numbers. We sequenced 1/10,000th of the genome in 1989, so 1990 was 2 10,000ths. By the time you get to 1%, you're only 7 doublings away from 100%. And it continues to double every year, and the data got cleaned up as they went. And the project was finished 7 years later. and we've now gone on to sequence many other genomes, and HIV took 5 years to sequence. We can now sequence a virus in 1 day. So same thing's going to happen with the brain. We're maybe at that point where we were in the Genome Project where we had done 1%. It seemed like we weren't anywhere, but it's an exponential progression. And I think the machines are us. They're part of who we are. We created them to extend our reach, to make us more than we are. I think if you took away someone's machines, all of them, or took away all the machines from human civilization today, we'd notice it. Human civilization would grind to a halt. You might say, well, of course, we've always been dependent on machines. No, I mean, 15, 20 years ago, most things were done using more mechanical means, technologies, but not the kind of computer-based, information-based, AI-based technologies we have today. So we've already become very dependent on intelligent machines. Consciousness is a difficult, subtle issue. In my mind, it's not a scientific proposition because there's no falsifiable experiment that you can conduct that would definitively prove that this entity has consciousness and that one doesn't. There's no machine you could build where a green light comes on, you slide one, okay, this one's conscious, no, that one's not conscious. You could build a machine like that, but it would have philosophical assumptions built into it. So Hameroff would want to make sure that there's some kind of tubules doing cellular computing. Penrose would want to make sure that it's doing some kind of quantum computing. John Searle would want to make sure it's transmitting neurotransmitters, biological neurotransmitters. Dan Dennett would want to make sure that no matter what, didn't matter what kind of methods it used, but it needed to have a model of its own thinking, and that's consciousness. But these are all philosophical assumptions, and different philosophers have different assumptions. Another leap of faith is, well, there's an entity called God, and God bestows a soul, which is a synonym for consciousness, on certain entities, human beings, and bestows them with consciousness. But this religious thesis is put forth as a leap of faith. They say, well, this is not scientific, this is a leap of faith, which is what it is. There are a lot of theories now that sort of cloak themselves as scientific theories, which really have no link to consciousness that's scientific, and I can't imagine how you'd make a leap like that. I think there's a fundamental conceptual difference between subjectivity, which is a synonym for consciousness, and objectivity, which is a synonym for science. My view of this, and it's a leap of faith, is that it's an emergent property of a complex system. And I do accept the Turing test. Now, literally, the Turing test is not a test of consciousness. It's a test of a certain level of performance. Basically, that a machine, through some mechanism, he set up this instant messaging with the human judge, but appears to be conscious in a convincing way. You're really convinced. You know, today, there are AIs today that are avatars in computer games, but you're not convinced. You don't really think they're really conscious, not yet. They don't have all the subtle cues. My view is that when they do, when they're convincing, and I believe they will be by 2029, I will accept that they're conscious. And I believe that other people will accept it. That's actually a political prediction. And you know, if we don't believe them, they're going to get mad at us, and they're going to be very smart and very clever and very influential. We're not going to want that to happen. But so basically, if it seems conscious, then it is. I mean, that's my leap of faith, and I think we will get to that point because they will seem conscious and they'll be very clever and intelligent. They will be convincing, and people will accept them, including myself. My whole claim, the core of my claim, is that future machines, not today's machines, are going to be at that level of complexity and subtlety that they are convincingly human and indistinguishable from humans, and we're going to integrate with them. And when we put these machines in our bodies and brains, we're not going to suddenly become, what we think of as an old-fashioned machine. We're suddenly going to become, like a mechanical robot. It's going to, if anything, enhance our humanity. Just like a Parkinson's patient who is actually very robotic. Before the treatment, they get this brain implant, and then they become more human again. These machines will make us more human, and they will have the subtle suppleness of human beings. So when your mother says, "Oh, I don't want to merge with a machine, and I'm not like a machine," she's thinking about machines that she knows, and she's right about those machines. So that's my whole point. The future machines are going to be different.
But no emotions. Not emotional.
Oh, they'll have emotions. I mean, that's the whole point. If you talk about intelligence without emotions, then you're talking about logical thinking. Computers are already better than you are or that I am in logical thinking. Trained mathematicians can't hold up to Mathematica running on a PC. There isn't a human alive that can hold up to a computer playing chess. Occasionally, maybe the world chess champion can hold up to a computer, but not really anymore. So when it comes to logical thinking, computers are already better than us in just about every type of logical thinking. It's specifically emotional thinking where we exceed. Emotions is the most complex, impressive thing we do. Being funny, getting the joke, expressing an ironic sentiment, even being angry, jealous. I mean, these are complicated behaviors, and they're very intelligent, subtle ones. That's where humans have an edge. In order to pass the Turing test, it's exactly what they're going to have to do. You don't pass the Turing test if you're a machine by computing pi to a million places or solving a mathematical theorem. Computers have, in fact, been creative recently in solving theorems, including ones that humans have never solved before. You do it by being emotional. This is the whole core of the Turing test. It's actually our more benign emotions, which are the more complex ones. Being mean, being the intelligence of a lynch mob that's very intolerant is actually not showing a very high level of intelligence. It's emotions like compassion and expressing a loving sentiment. I mean, these more benign, ennobling emotions are actually more complex, more representative of what humans are good at and that are more difficult to achieve.
But could you have such if you don't have a biological body?
Well, I think so. Ultimately, our high-level emotions are not dependent on having a human-like body. I do think, though, that machines will have to have a body. It may be a virtual body in a virtual reality environment, which will be very convincing. I mean, you can see harbingers of that already. You can go on Second Life, and you see all these people walking around. Almost all of them have a biological human behind them, controlling that avatar. But there are actually some avatars running around Second Life who don't have a biological human behind them. They are AIs, they're just bots. And there's kind of a Turing test going on. How long can your bot get away with not being discovered as being a bot? Can you? So far, it's not very long, but it's actually getting better each year. But we do a lot. Our emotions and even almost all of our thinking is directed at our bodies, meeting its needs, its desires. We have to have some equivalent of that, some instantiation in the physical world, even if that world is virtual. technologies are a double-edged sword. That was true of fire and stone tools and the wheel. It liberated humankind, but it's also been used for destruction. That's been true of every technology. These new technologies, being able to manipulate biology, that's a good thing, right? We can reprogram biology away from cancer and heart disease, diabetes, presumably good things, although people argue against that also. But it could also empower a bioterrorist in a routine college lab to reprogram a flu virus to be more deadly and create a super weapon. We need to create a rapid response system, a biological immune system, if you will, that will combat against that. I'm actually working with the U.S. Army on setting up a rapid response system that can detect a new biological virus and deactivate it quickly, similar to what we do with software viruses. Nanotechnology will enable us, for example, to create any physical product that we need from information in very inexpensive input materials by reorganizing matter and energy at the level of molecules. That'll be very liberating, but could also be made to create super weapons, let's say self-replicating entities that would be very destructive. There are actually technical solutions to how we can keep the world safe from that. They're not pat solutions. They're difficult solutions that constantly have to be revised, just like our technological immune system against software viruses. It's not like we can just create that and then just forget about it. We have to constantly make it more sophisticated. The biggest potential dangers from artificial intelligence that someone could use, or it could have its own program of being destructive. And if you have an entity that's a lot smarter than you and it's bent on your destruction, that's not a good thing. The only way to defend yourself would be to have some other AI that's even smarter than it, that's on your side. So there's a lot of discussion. How do we keep these future AIs, quote, friendly, meaning embodying human values? And there are a lot of ideas about that. It's a complicated subject. My own view is that we do benefit as well as undergo harm from these technologies. I mean, you can see that in the past. There were 180 million people who died in the wars of the 20th century. So we've seen plenty of destruction in human history made possible by technology. On the other hand, human life is much better than it was before. Read Thomas Hobbes for what life was like a few hundred years ago. It was short, brutish, disaster-prone, disease-filled, disaster-filled. It was extremely harsh to be a human being for 99.9% of the population. Even the wealthy were subject to all kinds of diseases. There was just 200 years ago, there was no sanitation, no antibiotics, et cetera, et cetera. So we've liberated ourselves a great deal. There's still a lot of suffering to go around. So I think we benefit more than we're harmed. Not everybody agrees. Some people think that technology and science and engineering are the cause of our problems. I don't think so. I think they're more liberating than they're destructive. But it's not my view that it's all positive. It is a double-edged sword, and we have to work at defending humanity from possible abuses. If you were to live hundreds of years, wouldn't life get tedious? And because you'd be doing the same things over and over again. And the answer is yes, I agree. If we had radical life extension, without radical life expansion, life would get boring. But we're going to actually have both at the same time. We're going to expand who we are along with extending our longevity. We're going to be putting these computers in our bodies and our brains. We're going to be able to expand human intelligence, our knowledge. We're going to be able to experience directly from within our nervous system millions of different virtual environments and have fantastic experiences. We're going to enhance our emotional abilities, and we're going to be able to be more creative. So all the things that make life worthwhile are going to increase as well. It's also going to increase our resources. People say, well, if we live a long time, we'll run out of energy. We already have peak energy. So that's not true. It's a long discussion, but we have, for example, in energy, I did a study with Larry Page for the National Academy of Engineering in the United States, we have 10,000 times more sunlight than we need to meet all of our energy needs. But I can't plug my refrigerator into the sun unless I convert it into electricity. Well, we're applying nanotechnology to solar panels. The cost per watt's coming down quickly, and the total amount of solar energy is on an exponential rise. It's doubling every 2 years. It has been for 20 years. And it's only 8 doublings away from meeting all of our energy needs. And we have plenty of sunlight to do that with. There's a similar story on water and food, housing. These same technologies that are going to extend longevity will expand our resources, and they will expand the quality of our lives. And so I want to be around to see that and experience it, to help contribute to it. But it's a good question, actually. If we just, when I say we're going to live hundreds of years, people think, oh, I'm going to be like a 95-year-old. What we think of today as a 95-year-old being compromised in their abilities for 400 years, and that doesn't sound very appealing. And even if I say, no, you'll be more like a 30-year-old for 400 years, and people don't find that appealing either, because, well, I'll get bored. And they're right, unless we expanded our lives. But the same technologies will enable us to do that. We do have, right now, even for someone my age, I'm 62, the knowledge to live long enough to get to a point in the future where we'll have more knowledge to get us to the next stage, and at that point we'll have enough knowledge to live a very long time. So it's a bridge to a bridge to a bridge. That second bridge, which is the maturation of the biotechnology revolution, where we can reprogram biology, is only about 15 years away. I'm 62. By some tests of my blood and hormone levels, nutrient levels, and reaction time and tackle sensitivity and memory put me in my 40s biologically. And I'm aging very slowly. So in 15 years, I expect, with a little bit of luck, it's not guaranteed, but I should be in pretty good shape to take advantage of this next revolution. And that'll give me more time to get to the nanotechnology revolution. So bridge one, which is what we can do right now, is to apply today's ideas. And there's actually a lot more that you can do to slow down aging and disease processes than people realize. One aging process is the depletion of a certain substance with a complicated name, phosphatidylcholine, in the cell membrane. So every one of our 10 trillion cells, when you're a 10-year-old, is about 90% phosphatidylcholine. And it's a very good substance that lets nutrients in. It gives integrity and suppleness to the cells. That gradually depletes. The body makes it, but not fast enough. So by the time you're 90, it's typically down to about 10%. And the cell membrane gets filled in with hard fats, cholesterol, and other inert substances that don't work very well, and they're very rigid. That's why the skin in an elderly person is stiff and not supple, and their organs don't work as well. So that's an aging process. Aging is not one thing. It's about a dozen things. That's one of the dozen things. That one is very easy to reverse by supplementing with that substance, which I do both in pill form and I do it intravenously as well. Another aging process is the clogging up of your arteries with atherosclerosis, with plaque. And even if you don't have heart disease, most people over a certain age have some level of plaque in their arteries. It makes the arteries stiff, interferes with circulation. Aside from being the primary cause of heart attacks and strokes, leads to impotence in men, claudication of the limbs. It's a very profound aging process and is a major cause of suffering, disease, and death. We know how to stop and reverse atherosclerosis. Now, it's not as simple as just popping one pill like phosphatidylcholine. There's a number of different processes that contribute to atherosclerosis. There's the whole story with cholesterol. There's inflammation, because it's an inflammatory process. There's a methylation process, which has to do with the chemistry of plaque and of blood. And we understand enough about all of these different aspects of the process to dramatically slow or stop each one of those processes. If you're aggressive enough, almost no one needs to get heart disease. And Dean Ornish and others have shown you can actually reverse process. So I'm very aggressive on all these things. I had very high cholesterol 35 years ago. My cholesterol now is very low. It's like about 100. My HDL, good cholesterol, is higher than my LDL, bad cholesterol, which is very unusual. So I have a very ideal profile. I have no level of atherosclerosis because I measure that. Part of the process is to actually look inside your body with scans and with blood tests and other things to see what's going on and adjust. So I adjust my program accordingly. So I take about 150 pills a day, mostly supplements, but some medications like metformin, which is actually a very good drug that I would recommend for anyone over 50, because it actually causes the same biochemical changes as eating less. It's what we call a caloric restriction mimetic. And so there are many ideas like this. If you're really knowledgeable and aggressive, you can dramatically slow down aging and disease processes. It's not simple to the point where you just take these few pills and it does everything for you. I think we will get to that, maybe 20 years from now. So right now you have to actually work at it, but it's worth it because getting sick is no fun.